Hello, everyone. Welcome to Clean Energy Connections. Esther Siskin from Solar One. We're really excited about tonight's event, the Energy Gang with Mark Chambers. This event sold out the quickest of any Clean EC event we've held over the past 7 years. So consider yourselves lucky that you have seats in the audience. So Clean Energy Connections, for those of you who are new, is produced by Solar One, New York City Acre, and Greentech Media. We'd like to give a big thank you to NYSERDA, our long-time sponsor of Clean Energy Connections. There are a number of NYSERDA staff in the audience, including the new president, Alicia Barton. So if, I'm not sure where all the NYSERDA people are, but hi. So if people can stay after the panel for the networking portion of the event, I'm sure you'll get to meet the NYSERDA folks who are here tonight. So the specific NYSERDA program that is funding Clean Energy Connections is called Clean Energy Communities. A lot of CEC acronyms out there. Clean Energy Communities is NYSERDA's program that works with municipalities throughout New York State to reduce their energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. Lindsay Hirsch, who's also probably in the audience somewhere, is working under that program with the New York City's Mayor's Office of Sustainability. So you can meet Lindsay tonight too. Just a show of hands, how many people have been to Clean Energy Connections events in the past? Great, welcome back. And how many first-timers do we have here tonight? Great, welcome. Well, we hope to see you all keep coming back in the future. And I also wanted to note that this event is being live streamed. We have a number of viewing parties throughout the city that are going on. So welcome to our online audience as well. And with that, I have two quick Solar One announcements. Our Oktoberfest event, our annual gala, is October 2nd. We've seen many of you there. We hope you come back this year. It's a really fun event. It's truly an Oktoberfest, and you can buy tickets online at solar1.org, solar1.org. And then the other exciting news for us is that we are about to break ground on our new education facility. It's been in the works for quite a number of years, and it's going to be constructed over the course of the next year. So October 17th, 10 a.m., we're having the groundbreaking. You're all invited. So with that, just a couple of housekeeping notes. The event is being taped, so if people can try to keep background noise to a minimum, try not to knock over those beer bottles. Thank you to Brooklyn Brewery for the donation of the beer. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat Sapinsley from Acre and to introduce tonight's event.
Terrific. It's a great crowd. Wonderful to be here. Thank you, Esther. We've been doing these things together for 7 years. Solar One has been a terrific partner. Solar One and the Urban Future Lab together are the real thought leaders in this city for everything clean energy related, so I'm delighted to be doing this. Okay, let's see. Who am I? I'm Pat Sappins. I have notes. Who am I? I run the Urban Future Lab, and somebody was happy that I was here. I run the Urban Future Lab and the Acre Incubator at NYU's Tandon School of Engineering. We have 3 programs there. Clean Start is a program for career professionals who want to enter the clean tech profession. So if any of you are in that, thinking about a career in clean tech, we have coursework for you that you can do at night while you're still pursuing your original job. Joe Silver, are you here? Yep, see Joe if you want to do Clean Start. Good entrance, Jill. We have a proof of concept center that's for professor-student teams that are coming up with new intellectual property in the clean energy, smart city, smart grid area. We can help them with funding from NYSERDA to commercialize that technology. And then we run the Acre Incubator, which is our biggest program. That's where we take young companies and help them to scale up. They have to have top-line revenue already. We help them to scale up if they're in the smart city, smart grid, clean energy space. You can apply at ufl.nyc. We'd love to have you. And if you want to learn more about what we do, you can listen to the Energy Gang podcast that was done when Jigar and Katherine took well-deserved vacations. Stephen Lacey approached us, 3 incubator heads and the head of a consortium of incubators called Incubate Energy. He asked us if we wanted to talk about what we do, so we did a Energy Gang podcast, which you can listen to and learn more about what we do at Acre. So thank you, Stephen Lacey, for doing that. And thank you, NYSERDA, of course. Alicia, we're delighted to welcome you to New York, and thank you for coming to this event. We hope to see you at lots and lots of events. Thank you, Greentech Media, for your partnership. And now, a shameless pitch for one of our companies. If you listen to the Energy Gang, you know that Stephen Lacey always has an advertisement for Huawei or something. Well, I have an advertisement for Project Economics. Nick, where are you? Oh, Nick will be by the beer later. He's over there waving. He's Nick Bowden. Nick is with a company called Project Economics. And Project Economics is proud to be selling little portions of the largest community solar array in the 5 boroughs. A new solar array is going in, SunPower is the developer. These guys are in the incubator. They have an innovative business model that allows any of you. Oh, you know, I forgot to do the Stephen Lacey thing. The Stephen Lacey thing was, sorry, what do you do if you've always pined for solar on your roof, but you live on the 4th floor of a 40-story apartment building? Who are you gonna call? Nick Bowden. So you can call him, you can sign up, he has the flyer. It's an innovative business model that allows you to buy solar directly here without lots and lots of transmission and distribution, which loses efficiency. Locally produced solar power can be bought by you in your 3rd floor apartment, even though you don't have a roof. So see Nick, he'll be signing people up outside there. I think I was the 3rd person in New York to sign up. I just have to find out later who the first 2 were. What else do you need to know? So that's an innovative business model. Speaking of innovative business models, we are going to be, Greentech Media is putting on September 26th and 27th, a conference called Rev Future 2017. So that's New York State's innovative way of rethinking what the grid should be. This conference will educate you in everything you ever needed to know about Rev. And if you come on the 26th, you will see 3 of our companies present their Rev demonstration projects. I'm proud to say that of the, I think it's 14 demos, 6 or 7 of them live in our incubator. So we'll do that on the 26th. We will also make a big announcement, which I know you all want to hear. And then on the 27th, we're having a venture pitch event where we're inviting investors to come listen to 8 companies pitch their innovative business models. So tell your investor friends that they should come on the 27th. The rest of you should all come on the 26th and 27th. We hope to see you there. Okay, and Joe can help you find the website. Joe, you're still wherever you were. Over by the beer. You'll find him by the beer. Okay, so the time has come for these paragons of energy geekery. Jigar, Katherine, Stephen Lacey, come on out. Yeah. Stephen Lacey has been kind enough to put us on his show. He's the inquisitor par excellence. It's a little scary to have to answer his questions. And tonight, their esteemed guest, their special guest, coming to you live from New York City is Mark Chambers. Mark is the director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and I'm going to turn this over to you. Welcome to Clean Energy Connections. Take care.
What's up, New York? I presume we have some fans of the Energy Gang in the house. It happens to be New York Climate Week. President Trump is in town. I think he's bouncing around the city, checking out events on deforestation and emissions trading policies. We have some tickets for him at the box office, but I think there was a conflicting event at the Russian embassy tonight. We'll see if he comes. I know you're thinking, no, he's really into permafrost melting. It's not what you think. All right, well, for those of you in the studio, welcome. This is the Energy Gang from Greentech Media, our weekly digest on energy, clean tech, and the environment. I'm Stephen Lacey, your MC and the editor-in-chief at Greentech Media. For those of you back home, we're here in New York Public Radio's Green Space in Lower Manhattan, and we've got a sold-out crowd here in front of us. We're really appreciative of all you coming here. And in case they didn't hear you the first time, let's send a little love back to the folks watching at watch parties, listening to this through their headphones, and maybe even to Donald Trump since he's in town. Well, we've got a packed show for you. We've got a bunch of different segments. It's going to be a great time. Before I introduce my guests, a very quick word. Of course, we heard a little bit about the background of this series, and we just want to extend a thanks to Urban Future Lab, Acre, Solar One, NYSERDA as part of this Clean Energy Connections series. We have so much fun recording at this venue. Also, a big thanks to the engineers here who make this sound really fantastic. What a superb space this is. And thanks to all of you for being here and taking the time to listen to our show and spending your evening with us. We really, we're just so appreciative of that. So let me bring in the rest of the gang. Katherine Hamilton is a partner with 38 North Solutions. She is our congressional encyclopedia, our grid modernization maven, and our occasional diplomat who prevents me and Jigar from perhaps devolving into name calling. Hey, Katherine.
The biggest job for which I am not paid.
Jigar Shah is the president of Generate Capital. He's our financial wizard, our business model innovation evangelist, and often plays the role of hard ass in our regular good cop, bad cop routine. How's it going?
Doing well, straight man.
Well, let's introduce our special guest, Mark Chambers, who's the director of the New York Office of Sustainability here in New York City. He's an urbanist and an architect who previously served in D.C. as the director of energy and sustainability. Mark, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. I got to ask you, I should know this, what is an urbanist?
Fair question. I'm thrilled to be here also. I think an urbanist is, and also thank you all for having me. I think an urbanist is someone who loves cities and understands that we are at our best when we are in dense environments where we can't escape one another, and that where we learn from each other and are able to practice a certain amount of empathy with how we exist. I think we're better for it.
Great. We'll see how much empathy we can draw out in this debate and discussion tonight. And your sock game is very strong there.
Sock game is always strong. Yeah. I consistently have a strong sock game.
Jigar, what about you? What do you got for socks?
I'm all right.
Stripe? We're going with stripes?
That's right.
I've got Jackie O socks on tonight.
Nice.
We have a game at Greentech Media. People on Twitter started pointing out who has the best socks, and so now internally in the office when we sit up and do panel discussions, we're all battling for the best socks.
I'm a flip-flop kind of person, so
yeah.
Sorry.
We're going to learn much more about Mark than his socks tonight, and that brings me to the run of show. First, we're going to test the gang's knowledge of New York's energy scene with a little segment we're calling Climate Week, the Game. Then we're going to get to know Mark Chambers more deeply and figure out what the director of the New York Sustainability Office actually does, some of the issues that he's dealing with. Then we'll go deep. We'll have a discussion and debate about the importance of local climate and energy policy in the Trump era, and we'll pass the mic around to all of you to take some Q&A during that bigger discussion. We'll probably have time for 3, 4, 5 questions, so please keep your questions short, but we'd really like to get some interactivity, and we'll put some mics up when that conversation starts. Finally, we'll have a quick news circuit. We're going to tell you which headlines are worth paying attention to, and of course, as every week, a bunch happened this week, and we're going to talk about it. And of course, at the end of the show, we're going to tell you something you may not know. So let's get started and find out who up here has the most trivial knowledge of New York's energy and climate scene. We're going to use each of these questions as a jumping off point to talk about the top issues of the day. In this first question, I am going to give you a quote from a New York energy luminary, and you're going to have to guess who said it. Here's the quote. When I talk about building out a network, building out the grid of the future, it's hard for me to see how it can be centrally planned. When you think about other networks that have been created around us, where technology has changed dramatically, it's been done because the providers have been able to be responsive to markets. Who said that? Mark Chambers, you're up.
Yeah, this is going to be short-lived. I do not know. I promised myself that with any question I did not know, I would answer Lindsay Hirsch. So I'm gonna go with that.
Fair enough. Anybody in the electricity space come to mind? People thinking big about the future of the electricity system?
It's a tough call. I mean, I think that.
Audrey.
All right, Jigar jumped
We'll go
in,
with that.
and your answer is Audrey? You think it's Audrey?
I think so. I think she's very eloquent.
Okay, Kathryn, what do you think?
My guess was Audrey.
You're all wrong.
Richard Kaufman?
Was it Kaufman?
Richard Kaufman.
He was
Yeah,
my number 2.
yeah.
I think Audrey wrote it for him.
Sorry.
So this was Richard Kaufman recently talking to one of our reporters about how to develop energy storage in the state. And New York's going through this really interesting conversation about mandates versus market reforms. And how much do you want to develop top-down mandates? In storage, of course, there is this mandate passed back in June through the legislature, and there is still a question of whether it is going to get passed by the governor's office. And I just want to use this as a point of discussion about what New York is trying to do here, Jigar, and maybe I'll pass it over to you first, because I think you have pretty strong views on using more creative market constructs versus top-down mandates. Do you have any thoughts about maybe the best way that New York can start thinking about storage? I mean, should they go ahead with a storage mandate, or is this the appropriate way of thinking about what to do with energy storage when other states are doing these top-down mandates?
Well, I'm certainly a big fan. I think that New York City has a unique problem, which is that they have, the most talented fire department in the world, and that fire department has not approved lithium-ion batteries for deployment in this city. I think there's a pilot that the DCAS has established 3 years in the making for a 1-year pilot, which I think is using vanadium redox batteries. Again, I don't think it's been approved by FDNY. And I think Vision actually has another battery. So one of my challenges is that I'm happy to go global with this stuff, but ultimately, the local stuff actually matters, right? Because, we do have to get some of these basic things passed. But I definitely think that right now, there are engineers in the city of New York who are designing microgrids using cogeneration, small amounts of renewable energy like solar and batteries. And they are deploying those solutions throughout New York State at, less than 10 cents a kilowatt hour delivered, which is cheaper than Con Ed, and it's certainly cheaper than a lot of the electricity sold in this country. And so I do think that it's possible for all of these 1,000 points of light to sort of disrupt the renewable energy or the utility industry. I just don't know how you do it without the batteries getting approved by FDNY.
And on top of that, I mean, New York City, the city itself passed, I think, the first municipal storage target, right? 100 megawatt hours of storage. So This is moving forward regardless.
Yeah, I don't think we have to choose. I think we can do both. You can have a competitive platform, but to really create an industry here for energy storage, I think you need the mandate. I think you do it. It's not there forever. They'll far exceed it. And that'll jumpstart the industry here, create certainty, bring a lot of business here. I think we need to do both.
Yeah. Mark, does that storage integration come under your purview?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, I think that to follow up on what everyone has said, I do agree that there's no future without storage. Like, it has to be something in which we are figuring out a way to integrate that and use power when we need to use it. And I think that working with FDNY to be able to do that safely is something that we're completely committed to. It is not easy. I mean, I think that the notion that we can push through technology quickly is a misnomer when it comes to protecting kind of the safety and well-being of all of the city. That being said, certain things can move faster, and I think that to the credit of the mayor, he's putting people in positions that have a little bit of experience in being able to connect with both the private sector and what their needs are, as well as understanding how the public sector really works and what is necessary to turn kind of a large ship. So, I mean, I think that the road for batteries is imminent. I mean, I think we're definitely not far out from seeing a cascade of being able to, particularly with lithium ion, being able to see how that can be done safely in the city. New York is a different city than anywhere else, though, so there is a certain amount of reasonable apprehension around the density concerns that I think FDNY has. But we're working with them and we're working with everyone. And I think we're going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the challenge of being an urbanist.
Indeed. You love it, and sometimes you have to let it go and then bring it back in.
Okay, let's move on to the second one. So, when New York City first released its energy benchmarking data in 2012, we saw some very interesting results. Which one of these buildings, according to that initial release, was the most energy efficient? Was it the Chrysler Building, which was built in the 1930s, the LEED certified 7 World Trade Center, or Trump Tower? Catherine, what do you think? You want me to go through them again?
I'm guessing the World Trade Center.
Okay. Jigar.
I thought it was the Empire State Building. How do we miss one of these things here? Or what about the Bank of America
the
building?
point-
One Times Square, isn't there like a
I
Times
didn't put
Square
it on the
building?
list for a reason.
I don't like it. Well, I'll just pick the Chrysler Building just to make sure that
Okay.
it's covered.
I'm going Chrysler also.
Yes.
Yeah.
It turns out that having few windows, very thick walls, very little ventilation makes you very energy efficient. So the
Asylum.
Chrysler Building won, and it beat out the Empire State Building.
Asylum-like
Now, those were
qualities,
2012 numbers. I haven't seen the updated figures, and that could have changed. But many of the older buildings in New York City were the most energy efficient, and a bunch of LEED certified buildings happen to not be. So that's actually, I brought that up because that's sort of a tricky thing to be thinking about when you're looking at this wide scope of buildings that you now have a mandate for to encourage energy efficiency retrofits, and you have to think about how the varying stock of buildings actually performs, and it's not as straightforward as it seems.
No, it's not, especially when you love buildings and you want them to kind of be beautiful and to actually provide the services that they encapsulate. I'm an architect, and so I definitely kind of really respect three-dimensional decision making and how that goes into actually creating a space that makes you want to be there. So I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. We can have beautiful buildings that perform incredibly well. Part of that is turning things off when you're not using them. The other part is actually investing in kind of a long-term strategy of building materials and knowledgeable kind of building operators to be able to really extract all those benefits out of the investments you've made.
Yeah, I saw that episode of How I Met Your Mother when they protect that building.
Yes.
But, I do think that this is why the mayor's announcement was so good, right? Because I don't
Step back. Tell us what the mayor's announcement was.
So the mayor's announcement, well, I might get this wrong, but was
I'd like to hear your interpretation.
was to...
That's what we do here.
Yeah.
We interpret facts.
Right. There's a lot of buildings that still use number 2 and number 6, heating oil to heat their buildings. And I think EDF played a big role in trying to get a lot of those buildings transformed, but it just hasn't happened. And I think the mayor finally said there needed to be a mandate to really help these folks save themselves from the burden of the expense of that fuel. I mean, it's actually cheaper to use other fuels. But on top of that, the actual health impacts of that fuel. And I think that mandate is important because I think in general, we constantly just say this, we need to do this energy efficiency stuff. But I think pinpointing a specific technology and really isolating it and saying this is, really a problem in our city and we really need to get rid of it is more effective. And I think the mayor showed real leadership in doing that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that interpretation. That was
Great,
good.
great. Any other specifics of the policy that you want to mention? Because it's a pretty big deal.
No,
and it's the first of a kind. It's the first of its kind in the country, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that variations probably say that one of the first in the world in terms of how we're targeting this. The essence of it is saying that we are identifying, just as Jigar said, that buildings represent the lion's share of greenhouse gas emissions in our city. 67% of the emissions come from buildings. And in particular, these large buildings over 25,000 square feet, do have an impact that we can have an effect on. And it's not that every building is bad. We basically took a look at the full swath of buildings. A lot of that comes from benchmarking data. And we said, okay, basically, the median performance of some of these buildings, we can kind of isolate, and let's figure out a way to get the bottom half of performing buildings to perform the same as the top half. Like, that's a reasonable and it's an aggressive achievement for what we can expect, and can also meet the industry where it is. And in order to do that, we targeted fossil fuels that are having the largest contribution to those emissions. So that resulted in about 14,500 or so buildings that really comprise about a quarter of the emissions. So the mandate is really going to set fossil fuel use energy intensity targets for those buildings. It's going to say that here's the cap of what we can expect per square foot per year, and in 2030, we're going to start enforcing that. You have some time to be able to, whether it's retrofitting, whether it is adjusting operational considerations, there's time to get there. We'll dedicate resources towards making sure you have the technical expertise, connecting you to financing, connecting you to PACE financing. We're introducing that as well with the council to be able to have low interest loans that you pay back through your property taxes, which is something that allows for banks to underwrite in a way that they wouldn't before. So I think providing the environment that makes it attractive to take out these loans and make these retrofits, and also being aggressive because we don't have a lot of time. So we actually can't wait any longer for the voluntary action that we were kind of hoping for. We have to say, we need to act. We hope that you go far beyond these caps, but we really need to see measurable reduction in the impact of our buildings.
And you think you'll create 17,000 green jobs in
Absolutely.
the process.
Yeah.
This feels particularly important, not just because of the economic impact, but because it's the first of its kind. But 2011, 2012, it was such a difficult process just to create these energy benchmarking laws, and now you're seeing the policies develop on top of those data requirements, and we're starting to see the fruits of that labor bear out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned before that I used to work for DC government, and one of the kind of benchmark, I don't know if now it's platitude, maybe it's just a quote that I had there was, more data, less carbon, zero excuses. And I think that part of that means that when you start this cascade of information coming out of buildings, whether it's from benchmarking or kind of other data, you create more options for more aggressive policies down the road.
On to our third and final question. This is for all you acronym freaks out there who love to abbreviate everything. We know who you are. REV, of course, is the most acronym-heavy regulatory process in history. And I want to see if you all can identify the real REV acronym from this list. I'm going to give you 3. So here we are. There's this new one called Swagger, a utility vendor data sharing protocol. There's Vader, the new tariff for valuing distributed resources. And of course, this great calculation of grid value, B plus SS plus IC plus AC plus P plus O plus SSB equals the value of B.
Wait, you're asking which one is right or which one's
Which
wrong?
one is real?
Well, that's obvious.
VDER.
Darth Vader.
Vader.
Yeah, I heard the folks at Advanced Energy Economy call it Vader, and I've since called it Vader. I don't know if anyone calls it anything
Well,
different.
now
here.
everyone thinks it's Vader after the crappy rule that came out last week.
Yeah, well, tell us about that. That's why I brought it up. So what's going on with this new value tariff?
Well, I mean, like, I don't know how to even approach it. I think that when you read the rule, this is the value of distributed energy resources, and for a little context, the first version of community solar was allowed to basically get full retail reimbursement for building that solar plant. You sold it to a retail customer, you got that revenue. For subsequent rounds, you actually have to limit yourself to the value of DER for your reimbursement rate in the future, right? So if you've spent all this money and all this time developing community solar projects, and then you get a crappy value of DER reimbursement rate, then all of that development capital goes down the tubes, and you lose out on billions of dollars of economic development and jobs and whatnot that are in these rural economies. And I think that like a lot of things in the REV process here, the utility fingerprints were all over this one, and it just irks me to no end that New York has this weird thing where the governor gets so many kudos for all the work that they've done in solar that we just can't hold the governor accountable to the stupid stuff that comes out, and so then we end up with this weird place where everyone thinks that New York's doing all this great stuff, and we've got less than 25 megawatts of community solar projects actually getting built in the state, right? It's just, it's embarrassing.
I've been using this phrase a lot lately. I think REV is an example of it being a Rorschach test, in that you can see it as a slow-moving process that's going to take a while to materialize and see it in a positive light. Or you can use it as an example of why utilities really are not capable of being innovative and getting outside their very specific sets of interests for this greater good of market reform, as you seem to allude to, Jigar. Katherine, any thoughts on the different interpretations of how REV is going in light of this pretty controversial evolution of this particular rate? I mean, how do you see people framing the way REV has gone forward so far?
Yeah, I think there is a combination of people thinking it's going too fast and people thinking it's going too slow. It depends on where you are. And
that breakdown is where?
ecosystem.
And that breakdown is where,
It's
generally?
like utilities versus third parties are actually
Right,
trying,
The
who are
employees
coming
of
to
the
the
utilities think it's
platform.
going too fast.
Where's the
and pretty much
platform?
everyone else thinks it's going too slow.
Yeah. So it's like, where's my platform? I want to plug in.
Well, I mean, you actually wrote great testimony with Wellinghoff and others about how this
Yeah.
might be done better, and
Yeah.
the commission ignored your
They-
input.
They were not there yet. And I also think about it in the context of what the ISO is doing on the DER roadmap. Like, how does this kind of intersect, and how is it then going to play into the wholesale market, and how do we think about it? So it's complicated. We know that it's complicated. I feel like we could learn a little bit from Cal ISO and what's going on in California and what they're able to monetize to look at what New York can do. But I think generally, though, people see New York as a leader. It's just that the devil is in the details.
Well, and I mean, I hate to say this, but Scott Wiener should know better. I mean, we've been working with him for years in New Jersey, and now he's over at the Public Service Commission, and this is not good.
Well, we've heard how you feel about New Jersey in past events here.
It's true.
Stop it.
It's true. Although I have to say, the new deal that they struck the other day on saving the New Jersey solar program is pretty damn good. So New Jersey has life in it yet.
All right, well, I'm feeling a little loosened up here, so I want to spend some time getting to know Mark Chambers here. We're going to figure out how his experience influences New York policy. And then we're going to talk about where it fits into this broader national picture, which will be the theme of our much larger debate, where you'll get to answer or get to ask some questions. I want to get down to the basics. What does the director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability job actually encompass? It's a big job.
It is a big job. It is I would say it's a fast-paced job that I am really excited, and it's a pleasure to be able to do it. The best way to think about it is there are probably three, prongs of what I'm responsible for. So it's like a triceratops of activity that I'm responsible for. My son is big into dinosaurs, so we also. I think first, I kind of alluded to earlier, is that there's a policy perspective. There's also a certain amount of implementation that is required, and then advocacy. And so I would say on the policy side, I'm responsible for crafting and guiding the city on its path to carbon mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. That's the charge. That's
like the Velociraptor goal. You
yes.
slash carbon emissions.
Yes, with like small, quarter-sized limbs, and I have that responsibility to, and that kind of plays itself out through waste. It plays itself out through transportation, through buildings we talked about before, through energy, and all of those components have 100 sub-components that we work towards. But it's a policy perspective, and it's really guiding and painting a vision for where the city needs to go, and how do we, as a city together, craft a route towards carbon neutrality on that kind of 30-plus year time horizon. The second part, in terms of implementation, goes to the conversation we had before about FDNY and everyone else. There are 70 agencies that you all interact with every single day. I'm sure on the way from the subway here, 13 city agencies you somehow interacted with. There are hundreds of thousands of people that work for the city that provide services and safety and resources. My role is to fully kind of integrate the work of sustainability into their work, and as a result, to connect with you and meet you where you are. So it means that I need to get deep into battery storage. It means I need to get deep into electric vehicles. It means I need to figure out also what obstacles are preventing people from being able to add this work into their mission vision. But bottom line, I have to figure out a way to make sure that we are bending everyone's skill sets and passions towards incorporating climate work, because that's the only way this works, is if everyone is somehow working on it. Not just from the city perspective, but all of you as well. I think the third part I would say is about advocacy, which is more about the fact that New York City is New York City. We have an obligation not just to the 8.5 million residents here, but also to think about what can we do to de-risk the work we are doing for other municipalities, for other cities and states, both nationally and globally. So, we push to have this building mandate. It's not just so that we can reduce emissions by 7% between now and 2030. It's so that New York can say to all of its other brother and sister cities, here, we did this. What do you need help with? If this works for you, copy paste and let's keep moving. Because we know that the impacts of climate change do not respect boundaries or borders or city and state lines. And so we have to actually figure out a way to speed up the process by which other people can do that. And a lot of that means we can take risks that other cities can't or are not willing to do because of their political leadership right now. So let's make it easier for them, because everyone has to figure this out sooner as opposed to later. So that's kind of the bucket of, I think, of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in my own experience, I have to say, there are a few places that can really invest in the best and the brightest policy people, within the movement. New York is one of them, and Mark is, representation of that. I think California is another place where they can really afford to have the smart people to implement AB 32. And And we're all in their debt because, frankly, like, this stuff's not easy, as Katherine can attest to. And getting the policy right requires really, really smart people.
Just remind me the timeline of when did you move from DC to New York?
So I moved at the end of last summer. It's coming up on a year. When I actually got the full-on offer to say, hey, we want you to join, and the mayor's excited to wanted to bring me on. I was actually I was at Comic-Con, and so I was
as any sustainability manager
as one
be.
should, and so I was here dressed as an impromptu Luke Cage, and I got the call, and I was like, this is great, because we kind of committed to my family. I have a son and a daughter, and my wife and I we decided we wanted to kind of move here, and we're going to kind of give all that we can to New York City, and so it was great, and I think it was kind of appropriate that I was kind of in full cosplay at the time when I got the message, because I think this is the time when it is require a certain amount of superheroes to be able to dive fully into this.
And was that part of the interview process? Like, so is the cosplay scene here pretty good?
Yeah.
Are you?
It's strong. It definitely came up. I mean, it's important, like whether or not you're fully into all of that New York has to offer.
Okay, so you got the job here. You moved to New York, and November rolls around, and we have a president who is basically verbally committed to rolling back everything that we've tried to accomplish over the last 8 years. What were you thinking? What kind of internal conversations were you having within your team, and how did that change your mission, if at all?
So, I mean, my transition up here, it was kind of right in the middle time. Like I was just leaving DC and coming up here right around the time of the election. So it was fresh for me, but to be honest, I didn't have an outlet yet for that. I had built a team in DC that was doing a lot of great work, and then now getting ready to start with a new team here that also has an incredible volume of work. And in the middle of this, we have this craziness that's happening in Washington. And as it started to unfold, you start to realize, oh, this actually can get worse. And then a little bit later, it's like, oh, this is going to get more and more worse. So for me, it was all about how do we kind of not focus on which civil liberty am I losing today, and focus a little bit more on how do we build the structure of the team to be able to fight aggressively. So what I've spent the time doing over the last 9 months really is to kind of reorg and restructure our team and to focus ourselves on how can we take the most aggressive big posture to be able to not only push back in the absence and abdication of federal leadership, but also create a lane for ourselves where we can say, okay, we might have toyed around this idea before. We know that we've done the kind of analytics that support that we have to go big in order to really start to bend this curve and start to. I mean, the whole game here is no longer just about crafting a course to 80% by 2050. The game here is front loading the work so that we can really bend that curve and have less emissions happen in total. It's a volume game, not a destination now. And so we need to have the structure in place to do that, and we need a team to do that. And so that's what we've been focusing on: building the team, building the structure, getting this mandate out the door so that we can have an aggressive policy stance to be able to build from. Now that this is out, and now that we are setting the stage for everything that comes after this, it's only hard choices now. So it's no longer a game of maybe you want to do this, maybe we want to do that. No, everything is hard and everything has to be done now. So there's a certain urgency that I like to kind of, if I had an office, but I don't, so because I do believe in open plans, and there's part of the architect in me that thinks that...
There's a bench at the park that you can meet Mark.
Right. If I had one, I would kick the door down every morning, just to kind of make sure that we are all recognizing that we have this window in time to really be as forceful with our strategy as possible, because everyone, yourselves included, are kind of counting on us to set that vision.
I mean, I just want to push back a little bit, and you and I have had this conversation before, but I you know, Mayor Nichols had a pledge that he had everyone sign. I think it was almost 1,000 mayors that ended up signing it, you know, sort of around 2008 maybe. And they didn't even benchmark their emissions, most of the cities, right? I mean, they didn't do anything, right? And I just, you know, I wonder sometimes whether, like, you know, this sort of federal leadership thing, you know, in some ways, you know, Bush got us out of Kyoto. It was one of his first moves. Yep. And, you know, Trump getting us out of Paris, like, in some ways, it maybe kicked a lot of these mayors in the ass and got them to actually do something, because they certainly weren't doing anything on Mayor Nichols' pledge.
No, I think it's fair. I mean, I think that a lot of this kind of movement that we've seen around cities has galvanized a lot of less progressive mayors and less progressive municipalities to do more. Some of them don't know what more looks like, and I think there's a part of this where we have to actually kind of lead and show what that is. But also another part of it is making sure that it's not just a desire to do it, it's actually having the political structure to be able to do it. So if the principal of a city, and the executive wants to actually get this and extract this data out of buildings, you know, that has to happen in partnership with their council, who are all a reflection of what the population, you know, wants and demands. You know, so I think that part of the issue is having, you know, again, rigor around what we're asking for, but part of it is making sure that everyone is truly demanding that and making themselves as vocal as possible. What we're going to see, I think, as a benefit and an outcome of all of these climate pledges and mayors kind of doubling down on this, is that you're going to have a more engaged population that are not just demanding something of their representatives, but demanding more of all of the gatekeepers for the information. So, I mean, as much information as I am able to access, you know, it belongs to the city. So, like, we try to be as transparent as possible. But, you know, there's always a conversation about, you know, getting more data from utilities. That's a conversation that also needs to happen. And I think that we need to make sure that everyone that's as engaged is knocking on every door possible to make sure that we're kind of liberating that data.
And Mark, how do you bring everybody along? So, you know, you have some pretty cool projects, blockchain in Brooklyn, these microgrids and things, but how do you also reach other parts of the city or other parts of the community that might not naturally be as engaged or may really need more social justice aspects for what you're doing?
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that, again, they're not mutually exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. That's really the cornerstone of this administration. And this is why I really wanted to come and work for Mayor de Blasio, is that he has restructured our metrics for success to give a priority and a kind of a mandate around inclusion and equity. So, like, we're trying to create, you know, not just a resilient and sustainable city, but a just city. And so one of the metrics, not just for my office, but also for every of those 70 agencies and everyone that works for the city, is that you have to make sure that equitable distribution of your work is a priority. And it also, not just equitable distribution, but a prioritization to communities that have been kind of structurally and historically under, you know, invested in. So I think that we have an opportunity now, especially around the narrative that exists with resiliency and response and adaptation, to recognize that it's, for the most part, like a lot of other kind of societal problems, the most vulnerable populations are the ones that are on the front lines of having to respond to that. You know, we see that not just in New York, but also in a lot of the other cities that are now dealing with, you know, aggressive weather. That, like, we have a responsibility to kind of protect, you know, the city in all parts of it.
Great. So we're going to move on to contextualize that in a national framework. But first, I just have a few more questions here to get deeper into all of your souls. If you've ever read French literature, maybe you've heard of Marcel Proust, or maybe you've just flipped to the back of a Vanity Fair magazine and read the Proust questionnaire. And there are very simple questions that I think get us to help understand a person, you know, a prominent figure, and what they're thinking, what their frame of mind is. And I want to walk through each of these and just go very quickly into a few questions for Mark, Jigar, and Katherine. So Mark, to you, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
So every year for the last couple of years, my brother Earl and I, we hike a section of the Appalachian Trail. And so we take like about 4 days or so, and the two of us go out. We typically hike about 60 miles, and so it's a lot of work. What's great about it, in addition to it just being an amazing time and kind of the rhythm of moving through the kind of this strange space that happens along the trail, is that we get dropped off typically by my parents. And so there's this, it's like, how much unsolicited advice can you cram into a car ride? And then we get dropped off, and then we kind of go on this trek, and we have a great time. And then on the end of it, it's typically like, my wife Nithya and my sister-in-law Mary and all the kids. I have 2 kids and my brother has 2. They're usually there to pick us up, and we're all dirty and like smell like we've been walking through the woods for 4 days. But it's that collective experience is full-on happiness.
All right, I like that. Jigar, what's your greatest fear?
I'm gonna get found out. No, look, I don't have as many fears as most folks, and I have to say the reason for that is because I was born in a small town without running water or electricity in India, and came over here when I was, like a couple years old, and so I think that the thing that I get most afraid of actually is that I really do think that this social justice stuff is real, and I think that for a lot of us, we actually are so disconnected from it that we don't actually even understand why they feel the way they feel. Like, I was talking to the guys at Singularity University, those guys in the West Coast who think that everything's coming to one like AI thing or whatever. And
is that like Ray Kurzweil's group? Or
yeah, that and Peter Thiel and all those
right.
crazy guys.
If you're hearing this, you're the resistance. I think that's what that
right.
is. Yeah.
And they all think they're going to live to 150 years old by taking nutraceuticals and whatever it is, right? And my big thing with them is I was like, do you not understand history? Like, do you not understand that, like, at some point, your selfishness will get you to the point where someone's just going to, like, take a direct flight from Bangalore to SFO, pitch you an idea, and shoot you? Right? That's how this goes, right? That's how social justice happens.
What?
No, but I mean, like, at some point, like...
I need to rewind that one.
No, but at some point, when you say that I want to use, like, 5,000 times the average human being's energy to be able to live to 150 years old because I'm that freaking important, or everything else, like, I think that's where we are. And I am really afraid of, like, the fact that everyone sort of looks at social justice and environmental justice as this sort of, like, thing that, kind of have to deal with. It's sort of like giving to the United Way. And it's not. Like, there are people who are so desperate and been so, like, sort of left behind by all of us that, like, at some point, like, it just manifests in, like, our selfishness, right? Like, and I'm most afraid of that because I'm a deep reader of history, and like, this happens over and over again, and it's just like we never learn. It's like the next society comes forward, and we're like, oh, like, this is not going to happen to us because we're so awesome, and it does happen. Like, and so I'm very afraid of that social upheaval.
Well, I've always thought that you've been wearing a bubble vest, but now I know that it's a bulletproof vest
Kevlar.
for when people
Kevlar.
pitch you.
Kevlar.
That's right. That's right.
Katherine, what's the quality you like most in humanity?
Empathy, and I will have another one, which is lack of prejudice.
Good answer.
Well, I mean, everybody's different and everybody's special and everybody's got something, right?
Yeah.
And people don't always recognize that in everybody else.
Mark, you get the last question. What's your current state of mind?
I am hopeful. I think that we are not going to miss this opportunity to kind of galvanize. I guess it's simultaneously my worst fear that we won't also do that, but I am hopeful that we will. And I think that we're in a place now of how connected we could be, that if we are able to kind of utilize the resources we have, we can actually meet this particular challenge. So I'm hopeful.
Well, I guess now's the time that we can figure out if we shatter that hope or raise it up. So let's talk a little bit about the national framework now. And we're going to sort of set this conversation up. We're going to debate a little bit about these issues. And we've got some mics up here. And in about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so, we're going to have people who can come to the mics, ask us anything you want. We're probably going to get to about 3 or 4 questions, so I apologize in advance if we don't get to that many of them. But we would love to hear what's on your mind. And at many events, we haven't taken questions, and I know a lot of people do want to throw things out there. Just a reminder to please keep them short. So we've been in a New York state of mind so far this show, but it's time to stretch beyond the Empire State and go deep into the empire itself, which is striking back against climate. Yes, of course, I'm referring to the Trump administration and its mission to destroy climate policy and hunt out any rebels pushing the cause. But the Trump administration isn't as powerful as it thinks. So far, 125 cities, 9 states, 902 corporations, and 183 colleges and universities have stood up and pledged to meet the Paris climate targets, many of them going beyond. This makes cities like New York City, of course, some of the most powerful forces in climate policy today. But how powerful? Is there an extent? How far can they go, really? And that's what we're going to mull over right now. We're going to talk about America's state of play in energy and politics, look at both the local and national level, and then, of course, we want to hear from you. So I think it's helpful to start with the We Are Still In movement, which you referred to, and is the basis for America's de facto climate policy today. Katherine, do you want to give us an accounting of where the We Are Still In movement is?
Yeah, so they have 2,300 organizations that represent 127 million Americans and $6.2 trillion of the economy. So they have it in different groupings. So cities and counties, there are 200, states and tribes. And I would say for cities and counties, they really are dispersed across the country. And in all those 2,300 organizations, all 50 states are represented in some way. The states and tribes really are located more on the coasts, the ones that have committed to this. So if you look, they have maps on the we'restillin.org website, so you can see where all these different commitments have been. Colleges and universities all across the country, middle of the country, coasts everywhere. And then businesses and investors also everywhere, 1,700 businesses. So there are a lot of people that have signed on. And I think another thing to look at is this Global Covenant of Mayors, which is kind of, you can access it through the wearestillin.org, where there are 125 U.S. governors who've really not just registered their commitment, but who've decided to take inventory, like New York is, creating targets and metrics, and then really establishing action plans. And that's what we need to see. It's great for people to sign on to a pledge, but it's another thing to really have them commit to something that is measurable and execute on it.
This was a major topic of conversation in a previous podcast. We spoke with one of your previous colleagues, Sam Brooks, who was in D.C. government, and he expressed a lot of frustrations about the lack of tracking of pledges. And New York, under your leadership and other leadership, has clearly stepped up and said, okay, we need better ways to track our carbon emissions. We need policies to be able to tell people, to give them the financial incentives to make those retrofits and to say, this is the target, you got to do something about it. And that seems to be very different. Are there different conditions in place that make you feel like these pledges are more than just press releases? Because that's the big fear to me, that this We Are Still In campaign sounds great. We can all say, look, local climate policy is stepping up. Trump administration be damned, but in reality, the mechanics are not in place to be able to track and execute on these pledges. Give us your thoughts on how you see that playing out.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's a challenge that is not. It's not the same challenge doesn't exist for every city or every government or every organization that is still in. I think for New York City, we've set the stage for this, for quite some time. We have a greenhouse gas inventory that is fairly robust, and
Right, none of this happened overnight.
yeah, and we have a 2005 baseline, and we have been tracking as to what is really happening and how we're moving towards our goal. That being said, there are two things at play. There's the one thing at play about galvanizing a movement. We're having this conversation because 375 mayors signed on. We're having this conversation because Mayor de Blasio, the day after Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, he signed an executive order committing New York City to the principles. These conversations in the context can be created in a way that is galvanizing and is activating for places that normally would not have done anything or not have made those commitments. And when those become executive orders, they become legislation, they start to bind those places into action. So it's not just kind of mindless cheering. I think it is something in which everyone is pushing themselves and backing themselves into a place where they have to respond. That being said, you have to have rigor to any analysis. And so you have to know where to start, and you have to know how you're actually going to be tracking your progress and pushing that information. I mean, last week when the mayor rolled out the plan for the mandate, one of the things he said in the press conference was that, we should create a portal to make sure people know, there's 14,500 buildings that we are targeting. People should know how they're doing. As they're going through the retrofits, maybe they're coming off the list. That's the kind of thing where there's the ability to have this real-time interaction as we are progressing and helping building owners make these changes, that I think is helpful. And I think that expands to cities when you're able to capture your data and you're able to have the same metrics across the board. That's where you start to get the economy of scale. We work with several other cities. We're one of 8 pilot cities working with C40 now to develop strategies to align our goals to a 1.5 degree contribution to global warming versus 2 degrees, and as part of the Paris alignment. That means that we have to have some kind of independent audit for what exactly we're doing. So there's structure that's being formed by the fact that we now are making this commitment as a collective. I think you start with a little bit of the cheering and you start with the galvanizing, but it's quickly forming into actual strategy. And for New York City, we back up everything we do. And so we are committed to not just putting out plans, but to actually showcasing that we can implement on those plans.
Jigar, do you feel any differently about the post-Trump environment, given the efforts that Mark outlined? I mean, where you do have cities that are saying we're committed to tracking this stuff. That seemed to be a big worry when we looked at the rise of local climate policy. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I mean, I certainly feel encouraged that there are people like Mark and others who are being empowered by their bosses to have this level of, sort of responsibility and effort. I still think that I was having a long conversation with one of our good friends when we were at that conference in Vermont. And, I've been working on solar for the better part of 22 years. And I feel like there's a lot of jiu-jitsu that we went through to get to where we are today, and we feel like we're actually on a pathway to ending coal, right? We're not there yet, but we're on a pathway of ending coal. They're not cost effective. It's sort of a fool's errand to build a new one, right? There's all this stuff, right? But the thing that frustrates me the most is that that's not true for food, right? For all of the BS around Amazon buying Whole Foods and this guy doing organic and all this other stuff, we are not even close to actually reducing our carbon emissions from food. And that is one of the largest carbon emissions that we have. When people say, well, what do you want me to be, a vegan? Kind of. Yeah, kind of. I think that, when you look at, Michael Pollan's work, right? It's very clear that we should be eating like our great-grandparents ate. And they were not able to afford meat, more than once or twice a week, right? So this notion that all of us came up eating meat like in an Egg McMuffin in the morning and then like with a Chipotle burrito at lunch, and then then a steak dinner at night is crazy talk.
So
And
Trump needs to stop pushing the meatloaf on Chris Christie.
he needs to stop. He needs to stop putting ketchup on his steak. That's ridiculous. But like,
Does he do that?
he does. But but this stuff is real, right? Like land use emissions are big, and the number one reason why we're losing the Amazon is because of beef production, right? And so like I am as hopeful as Mark is, and I want to be hopeful about the We Are Still In movement. But I think that there's a level of seriousness that's lacking in all the changes we need to make. I mean, there was a great article in the LA Times today about cars and how anyone who ever does anything about cars in California loses their job, right? If you say anything about, ripping their, like taking their car out of their cold, dead hands, right? Like you lose your job. You have a recall election and people lose their jobs. And, like that same thing's true in New York. I still have no understanding of why we don't have congestion pricing in Manhattan. Like it makes no sense that like today, it was impossible to get from one place to the other place in New York City, even though it's got like the best subways and the best buses and all the other things, because like all these private citizens want to own cars that they never drive, and they just pay $400 a month to like park in parking lots, and we let them do it. We just tax them, and that's fine. Like I just think that there's a level of seriousness that I'm looking for, that's not about like just saying, oh, we're putting solar on a bunch of buildings, like look how awesome we are. We're doing, and I love that Pat's number 3 in line on the community solar piece. But we're not like decarbonizing the grid here with that, right? Like I think it's important for us to actually like be real about the fact that we have Paul Hawkins' book and we have this person's book and we know exactly what it takes to get there, right? And we're not doing it, right? And I don't think it's the Trump administration's fault. I'm happy to blame him just because he sort of is weird and looks like an orangutan, but it's I think we all have to take responsibility for the fact that like we want to live this lifestyle and we don't want to actually figure out what it takes to decarbonize the planet. And it's tough, I know, but I think it's possible, but I think it's going to take some serious conversation.
Yeah, of course, that's what the podcast is set up to do, I suppose. But look, that's a pretty heady set of issues to deal with right now, and each one of those sectors that you identify could be its own podcast, and we could probably be choosing more of those topics. But why we're choosing electricity, efficiency in the built environment, that's because we're seeing incredible amounts of capital deployed. We are seeing business model wins, people figuring it out, and we're seeing an explosion of growth as a result. And so it's important for us to tell that story and to be saying, hey, look over here, we're actually making progress. And when you can't get otherwise intelligent people to even recognize that that exists, that's a problem.
No, look,
and
I
so
agree.
like, yeah, we can talk all day about the agricultural sector. All these things you identified are so extraordinarily important, but the huge wins that we are seeing right now are not even being recognized by supposedly many of the smartest people in the world.
I mean, I'll jump in on that too, because I think that we're also recognizing the fact that not everyone are the smartest people in the world, and not everyone have the time to focus on being the smartest people in the world, and we have to work on everyone's behalf. The ability to think about focusing on a lot of these problems also recognize the fact that you have time to focus on those problems. I mean, I think that we don't really acknowledge the fact that there's tons of people that would love to be diving into the agricultural sector and what's the impact of beef, kind of production, even simply in terms of water use, but they don't have the time. And the reality is that this goes back to the comment on kind of larger around social justice, is that part of the work we have to do has to remove obstacles for people to be able to contribute to this particular cause. So it's not just enough for, like Jigar's right, it's not just enough for us to put solar on rooftops. It's not just enough for us to kind of do stand-ups in front of efficient buildings. We were talking about pre-K for our kids earlier. The mayor is pushing for universal pre-K 3. That's 62,000 kids that get to go to pre-K at 3 years old, and that means that we're talking about over 100,000 parents that get time. And that time is something that you can contribute, not just to kind of economic stability and to like kind of, basically being able to have a second to yourself to think about things. But it also means that if we are galvanized around this common vision that is being painted by a lot of local and really progressive mayors and cities, then perhaps there's a way forward. We're not just saying that this is the right thing to do. We're unlocking the potential of people to be able to participate in that. I think that matters.
It's okay.
Okay.
It's the next one.
I guess the question that everyone's asking, and I haven't seen any really good hard numbers, when you count up all these pledges is throughout the United States and that we are still in campaign, like, is this enough to counteract what the Trump administration is doing in walking away from, say, the Clean Power Plan? I mean, like, are we doing something that can completely counteract the Trump administration policies?
I mean, that was the beauty of the Clean Power Plan, was that it was state focused. So it was all negotiated by states. States could set their own targets and decide what they wanted to do to meet those targets. So I think that can go on. And so it's great that cities are doing things, but states are also moving forward. And I think certainly as that's going to continue to go forward. What we have ceded is international leadership. That's what we've ceded by Trump stepping away. And so we're not being seen globally as the nation that's leading everybody forward, unfortunately. And it means other people will take that on, or we'll have to find communities of mayors and state governors to be able to take that on for us. But it did cede a pretty important role for us to back out.
Yeah. Can we just talk about this weird news story over the weekend about international climate diplomats telling reporters that the Trump administration, or at least officials at the State Department, are saying privately that the administration wants to stay in the negotiations and that no policy has changed? Sarah Huckabee Sanders came out and forcefully said, no, we're walking away from this deal. But very clearly, like, nothing is really changing. The United States is still going to be party to these agreements, and it's a complete shell game. It's just the Trump administration wanting to convince the public.
Dorothy, you've always had the power to go back to Kansas, okay?
No, but
we decided the terms of our negotiation, right? It's not like he can do whatever he wants.
Right.
It's like he sounds like somebody did it to him, like, we got a bad deal out of this. It's like, well, we crafted the deal for ourselves, so really, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, any thoughts on how this impacts U.S. standing or our national policy in any way, which I don't think it does. I think all it is a rhetorical game, and that's it.
So there was a big money conference this morning on clean energy infrastructure, and Barry Worthington, who is the head of the U.S. Energy Administration, they're like a association, sorry, was on stage basically talking on behalf of the Trump administration. And he basically said, we're going to meet all the emission standards under the Clean Power Plan. We're going to meet all the other standards. And it's really just because the technology is good enough. And we're rolling it out, right? Which is true. And it's sort of what I've been saying for a long time. Like, I loved the previous president. But I do think that it's always been like the states. It's always been the companies like the ones that I've run in the past that have actually led the charge. It's the business model innovation of all of our companies going into Brazil and El Salvador and other places and figuring out the finance and bringing in OPIC and Exim and all the other stuff that's solving these problems. It's not the President of the United States. And they say all sorts of wonderful stuff, but remember, in the first term, like, Obama was pushing LNG like it was going out of style, right? He was the one going around the world telling everybody to build $2 billion LNG facilities for import terminals, right? Luckily, they were too broke to pay for them, and so we didn't get a lot of them. But, like, I just think this notion that, that Obama was the one pushing all this stuff around the world is crazy. It was always governors, it was always states, it was always, like, the companies of the United States of America that had all of this extraordinary knowledge and resource that were going around the world educating China and educating India and educating other people about how to do this. And they're still doing it because it's in their best interest to do it, and they're making the most money, and the Europeans don't know how to do it. So it's like, it's still like our game, and I think we're still winning it. This whole thing to me is just a colossal distraction.
Mm-hmm. Mark, you get the last question on this before we open up for Q&A. Do you consider yourself, the mayor, other important figures in New York City to be the new climate ambassadors?
I think some would think so. I personally think that all of you are. I mean, I think that we're moving out of the time when we need to rely on central figures to be the hallmarks of academia in terms of saying this is what needs to happen. I also loved Inconvenient Truth, and I used to play it, project it on the wall in my house, and but I think that we are in a place now where that is not necessary in order to galvanize change and to actually act. So we're around the points of saying that there are lots of companies that are actually being equally as aggressive and making strong commitments, and also innovating around a lot of these solutions. The employees that work for them, their families, their neighbors, like all of you that think about what you can do to turn your particular skill set towards this effort, are the true ambassadors, because you also have the ability that has not happened in kind of previous generations to be able to amass your particular opinion together into a force. One of the kind of first things that happened as I started to come work for the city related to Trump was when he issued a travel ban. And to see what it looks like to have a city, both the city government as well as a population, kind of galvanize in support, and like what it was like to look at the threads on my phone of people, carpooling to the airport to be able to collect as many lawyers they could on the way there. I mean, I think that there is a part of where we exist right now that we don't need ambassadors. We need everyone to take this as a personal commitment that they then make a bottom line for their company, for their metrics of success, because it requires all of you, and it requires that right now. So I'm less into kind of the heroes, and I'm more into everybody knowing that they are essential, because we're running out of time.
Can I second that? I think the numbers are actually pretty surprising to people when you hear them. We only have 25,000 incorporated cities and towns in the entire United States of America, right? That's it. And climate change is really about making sure that you're replacing bad infrastructure with good infrastructure, right? And today, what all of you know is that building a brand new building that's net zero energy pays for itself over, a very short period of time, right? I think what all of you know is that widening a road is the dumbest thing you could possibly do, because it just increases traffic. All of you guys should know that, and if you don't, you have to catch up on old Energy Gang podcasts. But what it requires is for you to attend the city council meetings, to attend your school board meetings, to attend those decision-making meetings. My own experience is that there are very few people in decision-making capacities that actually are fighting us on this. I think almost no one is fighting us on this. They honestly just don't know. And so they just cut and paste whatever document that they put out to RFP in 1970 and put it back out. And if someone shows up and says, actually, there's a local firm that's doing this other stuff, you probably should widen the bid process to allow for these other non-standard bids to come in, they'll do it. But no one asks. No one goes to the water board meetings. No one goes to the things. And so I know it's a big sacrifice to go to these things, but those are the decision makers who make the decisions around all of our carbon emission infrastructure, right? And it's really just about showing up and telling them that there's these solutions, that they should open their, sort of aperture to allow them in.
I agree it's up to all of us, but I also think people need to feel empowered, and they haven't. I think this has been a nut that we haven't cracked about climate change. It's such a big thing. What can I do? And I think being able to have real actions and know what you can do in a real engaged way is going to be really important, because I think people have been a little bit lost. They think it's a problem. They also it's not at the top of their list because they don't really know what they can do about it. So I think that's a really big issue for people, is like being able to engage on a very individual level and yet still feel like you're making an impact.
Absolutely. I agree with that for like the general public who just sort of hears a little bit about climate change here and there when they turn on the news channels and maybe they cover it for 2 to 3 minutes every year. But for the people sitting in this room and the people that we talk to every day, it is on the top of their mind, and they are doing real concrete stuff to try to solve market challenges to get us to that broader goal. And I am continually inspired every day talking to the people who are like working on those real world challenges.
Or at least once.
So respect to all of you. Let's get to some Q&A. We're going through time here pretty quickly, but if there are a couple questions, we've got some mics over here. We'd love to hear from some folks. Don't be shy.
Yeah, one on this side.
Yes.
We're all good?
Yeah, we're all good.
First of all, thank you. My name is Rimis Galbanas. My company, Malka, is part of the Urban Future Lab. It's an open platform for data-driven sustainability initiatives. So Mark, you mentioned earlier one of the roles is to really ingrain the culture of sustainability across all the agencies. That's no easy task, obviously. But then you also said to ingrain the culture to every citizen, every building owner in the city. Now, I think the first step to that is all the policies that New York has actually created, a lot of the regulations, a lot of the pledges, but what we've ended up is this smorgasbord of policies and rules and regulations. You mentioned quite early as well that with data, you basically translate that to no excuses. I'm wondering, what is the role of data? How can you actually organize data, translate that to action to actually say that there is no excuses to meeting these goals in this environment of really variable policies and regulations?
So I think it's a great question, and I think that it really speaks to is the fact that the technology, especially around building data and building information systems, has evolved to the point of which it's not as critical to have significant kind of building management systems as it has been in the past. And so to your point, if for data is important if it's easy to get. You know, when you start to get into large capital projects that require significant investment, it becomes a time challenge. And I think that where we are right now, we have cut a lot of the ability to get the data out by using smaller technology. Really, I just need an AMI that sends me real critical pieces of information, and then having someone with a laptop somewhere that can actually really parse out what that means in the building, because we need to be able to make simple decisions quickly. And so as far as the big picture, I think that kind of from the work that you're describing that you guys do, we need the private sector to be able to help us promote and activate and test out very quickly implementable solutions to get as much data as possible, but on the same side, recognize that we need someone that can analyze that data and give us some quick responses as to what we need to do. So there's a lot of pieces to that, but we're excited to be able to bridge that gap and use the city's infrastructure and 4,100 buildings as a test bed for that.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm a mechanical engineer at Ecosystem Energy. I was really curious to hear more about how do we get facilities operators, building owners, the government to kind of adopt common sense solutions. So the thing that kills me every day when I go on the subway is it is all still fluorescent lighting and there's not a single LED in the entire MTA. Who do you talk to for that? Likewise, when it comes to reducing carbon emissions in buildings, the only way to get it to zero is to electrify every single building. But I cannot name a single building that is really big that is completely electrified. How do we kickstart these conversations? How do we get people to seriously consider electrification and adopting common sense, low payback measures like LED lighting?
I like both of these questions because they get to the core of the most difficult challenges that you're dealing with.
So to the question about electrification, it's like we are in a transition time, right? We don't want instantaneously for every building to be electrified, right? It has to happen in continuity with the grid being more and more renewable, right? More and more renewable grid, more and more storage to be able to kind of use the power when we need it, and letting us be in a place where we're not, turning over the grid, in a few years. I think that having examples of how projects can be successful is helpful, but I'm just really interested in scale and being able to have solutions that people can wrap their brain around. That's the benefit of what we're trying to accomplish with this mandate, is saying that, look, there are a lot of different ways to cut your fossil fuel use intensity. It's not just about having a new boiler. It's not just about kind of changing out a few of your ancillary systems. It has a lot to do with caulking your windows or putting new windows in or changing the insulation in your roof, or again turning stuff off when you're not using it, setting a schedule. I think that the ability for us to incentivize more action in terms of actively monitoring and managing your buildings is a huge step forward in terms of getting to those buildings that can actually take in 100% renewable energy.
Yeah, and the way facility managers work is like, your chiller goes bad and you get like the first thing you get your hands on. Mm-hmm. And if you instead have, well, the first thing I get my hands on or the best thing I get my hands on is cheaper, it's more efficient. I'm not going to get a permit to put it in because of what the rules the cities are creating, then I'm going to think differently about it. But a lot of this stuff these guys don't have time to think in advance in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
The person whose job it is to electrify everything is the electric utility. If they were actually capitalist organizations that had shareholders and want to make profits, they'd want to sell more of their crap. And it's just shocking to me how bad they are at their job. I mean, we basically sell less electricity today than we did in 2003. What is that? They're going out and saying to people, if you want to buy an electric car, we'll give you an extra $800 subsidy. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I mean, we got to go back to the 1930s. When we actually used to have showrooms for refrigerators and lights, and we convinced farmers and ranchers that they wanted to be electrified. And they actually have to do their job. They have to go to people and say, this electrified future is better for you. Here's why it's better for you. I'm going to send somebody with my logo there that you trust to tell you why it's better for you. Oh no, by the way, we're going to finance it because New York State has on-bill financing, and on-bill financing is super cheap, right? I just think that this is what I'm saying is you guys need to get more outraged. I just think that when I do no money down financing, which we're doing for a lot of HVAC systems in LA right now, it's super hard. Nobody wants to listen to us. Nobody cares. They're like, oh, yeah, but I use Train and Carrier, and they sort of do this thing. And I'm like, well, but it saves you 60%. Oh, that sounds like a lot of work. And so we don't want to do it. And we're getting paid through this LCR contract to do it. And it's so hard. And I just that is the entirety of Richard Kaufman's plan. Right? His whole reason for being here is to get the utilities to get off their butt and actually want to make a profit. Right? And he's saying this shouldn't be on the regulated side, it should be on the unregulated side. But you can use all of the tools from your regulated side to sell on the unregulated side. And that's why he brought Audrey in. And the utility said, well, we don't want to do any of that. Right? And that's why we're here. And I just the fact that we're not more outraged about all of this stuff, gets to me, because they really are that bad. They are the enemy.
We got time for one more question right over here.
Hi, my name's Charlie, and I work for Pure Power Engineering. We're a commercial solar design firm. My question is also for Mark, but if anyone else wants to weigh in, I'd love to hear your answers. So Mark, there's no red tape. You have the keys to the city. What are 3 things you would do, and what are 3 things you would then ask of the citizens of New York City or elsewhere to help galvanize this movement?
It's a good question. Yeah, thanks.
That's 6 things. Can you keep
6
them?
things. All right. So 3 things I would do without any regulation or responsibilities, and then the other 3 are 3 things I would ask of everyone.
Citizens, yeah.
Okay. So as far as I'm looking at this from the perspective of how can we get the most done as quickly as possible, right? So the first target for me has a lot to do with buildings. Like, I have no regulation. I am increasing the amount of performance required in buildings. Because I have no regulation, we're also, somehow convincing a lot of people with a lot of money to pay for that. So banks, get ready. The second thing I'm doing is I am figuring out how to aggressively transition everyone that has a car to either a bicycle or walking or mass transit or an electric vehicle. For most part, I want less cars in the road, and I want all the ones that are on the road to be electric. So there's whatever makes that happen as quickly as possible, and that might go to mass production in terms of some of the new long-range vehicles that are coming out. And then the third thing I'll say is that is starting to tackle something that is kind of really important, I think, is our relationship to waste is something that is fraught with problems. And I think that the ability for us to quickly turn the corner to not just single stream for recyclables, but for having actual organic, actual active participation in organics. That one's gonna be on both sides of my list because we want all the resources to be able to collect food waste, and we want everyone to participate. Like, we have got to stop throwing food away. Like, it's something that we gotta fundamentally get it, move past that as a thing that we do. So now it's 3 on this side, and I got 2 left on the other side. What do I want you to do? I want you to recognize the fact that you are part of this conversation is not just a kind of a thought exercise. I want you to recognize the fact that you have an obligation to bring more people into this message. We cannot keep being this esoteric group of folks that is just tree huggers and energy wonks that are kind of, moving in circles. Like, we have got to recognize that there are, millions and millions of people that need us to be able to translate what we're doing into actionable items. And it's not just my responsibility to do that, it's yours too. So take it seriously and start to actively recognize that everyone you interact with in your day-to-day is an opportunity for you to start engaging on what you have already indicated is really essential to our existence. And there's one more I have left? Or,
Yep.
Gosh.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
That's pretty good.
I think that's awesome.
All right, I'll stop now. So is that right?
That was impressive. I can't get past a 2-part question, which is why I'm the guy asking questions usually. All right, so we've kind of run into the end of our time, but I'm going to devote a few more minutes here because we got to go through some of the top news stories. There's a lot happening, and I want to get the take from each of our members of the gang. This is what we call the news circuit. And I had one at the top of my list here about the White House's conflicting reports on whether or not they're going to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. I think we've agreed that it's not really that meaningful at this point. I did want to transition into an interesting congressional development, which is that a House committee passed a bill to get a certain number of autonomous vehicles on the road, and there's this bipartisan push to support autonomous vehicles, which of course in this environment seems pretty exciting and rare. Katherine, anything you want to say about the impact of that autonomous bill that is moving through the House and could potentially pass the full Congress, and any other congressional priorities we should be keeping our eyes on that have happened since that miraculous Democrat presidential Trump agreement on the budget?
Oh, right. That one. So the Self-Drive Act, H.R. 3388, passed on a voice vote on the floor of the House. So they're just waiting for the Senate to act now. But it's pretty great. It allows for more consumer protection. It kind of divvies up the role of state versus federal on autonomous vehicles. It updates safety standards, ensures more R&D. And one thing that's interesting is that the Committee of Jurisdiction was Energy and Commerce, and they are doing a series of hearings now on called Powering America. And I'm working with the majority staff on really innovative ideas to educate members. I wouldn't say these are necessarily hugely innovative legislative proposals yet, because that's not there, but they're looking at a number of things: the role of consumer in a transitioning grid, reliability, what should the power markets look like, how do we transition, how do we allow everybody to participate. So it's pretty interesting that they're moving forward. There's a bit of a pent-up demand in actually doing something. There's been so much posturing, and I think that at this point, I'm really happy to see people talking about this stuff and thinking differently. And I think everybody knows, whether or not you're talking about climate change, you're talking about innovation and U.S. competitiveness and jobs, and those are all still very much in the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about this important milestone that we passed, according to the Department of Energy. So we've been obviously tracking utility scale pricing and installed cost per watt at GTM Research, and it looked like many projects were dipping below $1 per watt, which is the Sunshot initiative goal. They have a slightly different way of tracking their numbers, and they announced at Solar Power International last week that the average industry cost had dipped below $1 per watt, and you could see $1 per watt solar in Kansas City, Missouri, for example, not just in Arizona or California. Jigar, significance there?
Well, I thought the headline was amazing. I think it's great that we've hit this goal.
What's
and I think
the headline?
Well, it was paired with $1 a watt, and it was paired with like 6 cents a kilowatt hour or something.
Yeah.
Was their goal, and we went below it, which I think is a testament to, the 200,000 plus people in the solar industry working together to get that done. I thought that what was below the fold was the dumbest thing I've seen in a long time, right? Which was,
God, is this a Greentech Media article that you're going to call out?
No, the announcement from DOE then said that they're going to basically decide to pivot to concentrating solar power, which I was like, what the hell? Literally, you buried the lead. And so they have $78 million or something for concentrating solar power. Which
my hunch is that this has to do more with their technology readiness scale, because now all of the their assessments have to do with early stage technologies, right. And CSP is more fits in line with what they're attempting to do.
Yeah, so I thought the announcement was great. I thought that the detail on the second page wasn't so great.
Yeah, no, incredible milestone. And on top of that, we saw this incredible offshore wind development in the United Kingdom.
5.7 cents, right?
Yeah, multiple bids coming in well under the contracted price for the Hinkley C nuclear power plant, which would be, I think it's the biggest nuclear power plant, or the second biggest nuclear power plant in the UK. A massive government.
Definitely the most expensive power plant in the UK.
Yeah, right. So now all of a sudden people are waking up and having a very serious conversation about whether it makes sense to move forward with the Hinkley C plant. Any thoughts from either of you on the significance of that pricing milestone in offshore wind, which is consistent with what we've seen in other countries in the last 6 months?
I think it's great, and I think it bodes well for the U.S. We have a tremendous resource, too, that is untapped, and I think that's great for us.
And New York, of course, is attempting to tap that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we're highly interested. I mean, I think to the extent that we can begin really the offshore wind market here, we're aggressively trying to incentivize that. I mean, part of it is having lessons learned like that show that this is not just competitive but only gets better with age, is something that we really want to see more and more investment come to the Eastern Shore in particular.
Yeah, no, I think Michael Liebrecht's really happy about the fact that given he's been bad-mouthing that Hinkley plant for a long time. And on the offshore wind stuff, I think it's amazing. I think it's important for everyone to note that there are very specific reasons why that bid can be hit in Europe that can't.
And those are?
All of the transmission infrastructure is being funded by the government, so it's not part of the cost.
That's a major European development that's very unique and,
Right.
and is not what we do here in the U.S.
Right, so that's a big deal. I think also just that they're far ahead of us in terms of engineering and design and like financing and all that stuff. So I do think the first plants in the U.S. will be more expensive.
A lot more expensive.
A lot more expensive.
Yeah.
And I also think that, I mean, Governor Cuomo, to his credit, has been like bearing the lead on the offshore wind stuff too, because he's very afraid of the Cape Wind situation occurring here in New York. And so we'll see when it gets to be super high profile and how it's going. I think Statoil is doing an extraordinary job of trying to educate all the stakeholders and making sure they understand that you really can't see them and they're really far away and all this other stuff. But I mean, we haven't yet like faced the NIMBY problem of, progressivism.
There's a really important, increasingly important procurement mechanism that we've heard a lot about over the last 40 years and have heard more about in the last 5 years, and that is PURPA. And that ensures that utilities procure power from lowest cost resources. And all of a sudden, solar in particular, but also wind, is cheaper than any other resources that utilities can procure. And outside of any mandate, utilities are being forced to develop more wind and solar because of PURPA. And now Congress is revisiting rules for PURPA. States are also working to change rules and contract lengths under PURPA. And this seems to be one of the least known but most important battles for solar and wind coming up here in the United States. Any thoughts on what's going on in Congress, first of all, and the long-term implications?
They've tried to revisit this before, this 1978 law.
When did they try to revisit it first?
Well, in the last,
Act, 2008.
yeah, 2000, right, in 2005. So they've tweaked it to add more, technologies to the qualifying facility list, to try to tweak that language. They also tried in the last energy bill in the last Congress to make some big changes, and they took all that off the table because it was just too contentious. And they did the same thing with the Federal Power Act too. It's really hard to adjust those. I mean, the issue is that it depends on which state and whether the utility is vertically integrated or not, but it's really, really helpful, for example, in the Southeast in moving solar forward. A lot of those are PURPA contracts. And the utilities have taken a stance that this is so bad for us. The issue is this is actually really great for consumers because it created competition. It allowed development beyond a monopoly. So it's really important that we continue to have that. I think that different industries are coming in. There was a big PURPA hearing, so different industries like SIA and others, the waste to energy industry, were all coming in saying, we really need this. You can't just pull the rug out from under us. And I don't think they will. They may try to do something in the House. I haven't seen anything on it, but I don't think it would get through the Senate. So I think we're okay, although we may see some tweaks.
It's a big deal, and it's one of Tom Kuhn's biggest failures in the last 8 or 9 years with the head of EEI, who
It's in his sights,
almost
for sure.
never fails. I mean, the big thing about this, for those of us who care deeply about this, and I talked a lot about this in the 2015 extension of the ITC and PTC, is that PURPA lets you put power on the grid. It just lets you do it, right? They have to give you a price and a contract length, but they let you do it. And if we can get it done, then that means that we are making the existing power plants less profitable because they're running less. I mean, the thing that everyone missed in the headline around coal beating out gas in the first 9 months of the year is that coal plus gas was down 4 percentage points on their sort of market share, and all of that was from renewables. If we continue to gain 3 to 4% market share every year, all of those coal plants and all of those old natural gas plants will be bankrupt. It is not possible for them to make money running only 23% of the time. And so, this is a fight that we have to win, because this is exactly how you put all those generators out of business.
Yeah. Net metering was the term of the day, and I think PURPA is becoming the new term of the day. There are, very, very serious issues that we need to grapple with, which is recalculating avoided costs based on where natural gas prices are, based on grid needs, length of contracts. I mean, certainly it's important to reevaluate a policy that's been in place for 40 years, but this is starting to be drawn down political lines. Last question. We've touched on this a little bit, Mark, but I wanted to know whether you think the current hurricanes and rebuilding efforts in Houston and in southern Florida are sparking any sort of real conversation about climate preparedness and resiliency in the way that we saw it in New York City. I mean, obviously New York City and the surrounding states were very unique in their response, but what do you think about the response so far that we've seen post-hurricanes?
So, I mean, I make it a special effort to try not to evaluate how cities are responding in the immediate aftermath, because there's just a lot that has to happen on the ground. But I think in terms of being able to understand how we exist in a world of adaptation, I think it is important to know that we're talking big dollars. You know, New York City put $20 billion into post-Sandy work, and that's ongoing. It's not a small investment, and it is something that only gets more and more expensive and requires more and more investment from cities because we are going to continue to see significant changes and significant impact, whether it's especially for coastal cities. So there's a lot of work to be done to protect cities, but we also have to, I think, acknowledge the fact, and this is what I would hope to be one of the bigger lessons learned in terms of managing, our resiliency stature, is that time and time again we see the same narrative that the most vulnerable populations throughout every one of our kind of urban centers and cities are on the front lines to having to deal with the impacts of the climate crisis. And it's not just floods and it's not just storms. It's also heat, and it's also other I guess metrics that we measure in terms of health and wellness. Like we will consistently be in a place where we have to socially prepare our cities as well as physically prepare them. So what I think one of the bigger lessons learned that we should be taking is being able to see how are we supporting the social structures of our communities and throughout all of our urban environments in a way that makes them more resistant and more resilient to these changes that are not just storm related, but are also recovery related. How do you get back on your feet after that? How do you create a network that allows for you to be able to not just reset your kind of physical life in your home, but actually use this as a lever for us to create advancement and an actual growth, whether it's from job creation or from kind of more connections being made to connect people and communities to resources. I think that's going to be one of the stronger metrics that we see as we're looking back on whether or not we were able to actually use this time in a way that created better and more thriving cities instead of ones with just more walls and barriers.
All right, we've reached the final leg of the show. We're going to tell you something we do not know. We pull out some anecdotes from our daily lives, our jobs, stories that we're keeping our eyes on. And Katherine, we're going to go over to you for your story first. What do you got?
Yeah, so it sort of leads into what I was going to say. Last week, I spent the week in Mexico City. It was after they had been shaken a little bit by their first earthquake, which really, really did damage in Oaxaca and Chiapas. And today they had another earthquake very close to the city. At least 20 buildings came down. They are more structurally sound because after the earthquake in the late 80s, they started changing their codes. And so the newer buildings are much stronger and haven't had much damage. But my heart goes out to those folks, and I wish them well. There are 21 million people in the Mexico City region, and they don't even know all the damage that's been done. But one thing I was doing down there is it was a big, huge conference, renewable conference. Part of it was mission innovation, and I just wanted to kind of highlight that. This was very hopeful for me to see globally how much people are doing on clean energy and sustainability. So Mission Innovation has got 23 countries that have committed to doubling their research, and many of them are doing more than double the research in sort of 7 challenge areas, and those areas are in various degrees of development and commercialization, but they really want to try to solve some gnarly issues. One, smart grid, off-grid, converting sunlight, HVAC, sustainable biofuels, advanced materials, and CCS. And it was great to kind of be able to talk through what are other countries doing. I mean, there were U.S. reps there, so I think the U.S. is still part of that. But it's really hopeful to see globally the community all trying to kind of row in the same direction to resolve some of these issues that will tackle climate change.
Jigar,
So I found out recently.
you always have like 2 or 3 stories. Do you have one today?
Just one.
Okay.
I found out recently that Con Ed had the largest DC power grid in the city. It was powering all the elevators when they were all DC powered way back when. And they finally ripped it all out last year, just in time for us to need it again for microgrids. But I just thought it was amazing that we actually had this entire DC infrastructure in New York City to power all the elevators before they were converted to AC with inverters. And, now we don't have it anymore.
Mark, what's your story?
It's good to know. Mine is, so I wanted to kind of highlight that, that I'm also like really appreciative to the city and for kind of welcoming me as being like a transplant. I live in Washington Heights. I live uptown in Manhattan, and near where I live is is a place called Highbridge, and Highbridge is really it's an aqueduct that was created, about 100 years ago. And initially it was, again, as infrastructure was developing throughout the city, it would, kind of bring water into large reservoirs that are kind of, right there, or kind of around 170th Street or so. And, over time, as the city's infrastructure started to kind of grow and mature, as infrastructure does, it became obsolete, became no longer necessary, went into a dilapidated state, and kind of sat idle for about 30 years or so. Became kind of a place that had to be quarantined off to a certain extent. But what the city did over about kind of starting like a little bit under a decade ago, is invest some money to kind of basically reopen Highbridge and reopen this as a pedestrian bridge that kind of spans the Harlem River. And what it does is that it creates this connection between northern Manhattan and the Bronx that you can only experience by foot, maybe by bike. But it is something for me that has been a very critical kind of metric and trigger of understanding what's possible and what transition in cities look like. There's always going to be a lot of technology that comes in terms of letting us bridge gaps and kind of financial models that help us better access kind of new implementations in buildings and around our built environment. But creating connections that actually connect people and actually make you have a time connection as well, and understanding the fact that we can repurpose things in a way that makes it better for us. And physically seeing that and experiencing it is something that I think we have to be really conscious about, taking the opportunity to really think about and experience. And so if you haven't been up there, I'm highlighting it as a destination, and take a trip up there, walk across, walk back. It's not that far, but it's something that is worthwhile as we try to create more connections, I think, between neighborhoods and also between where we have been and where we need to go.
That's fantastic. I've got 2. I'm pulling a Jigar. The first is just process. So you saw some of those flyers underneath your seats. Next week is our New York Rev Future Conference. We've touched on a lot of issues here, and we're bringing together our grid research team and pretty much every luminary possible who's working on New York regulatory and energy policy here. And if you're like a business trying to like understand this space, maybe you're part of a utility, still trying to get a handle on how to work with many of the vendors coming into the state, or you're from out of town and you want to know what's going on in New York, I really highly recommend going. Secondly, a big life change for me. I am going to be getting married on October 7th, and my fiance is here in the crowd somewhere, Sandy Christ. And I'm very thrilled about that. She's been a huge supporter of me, and that also means that you're going to see a couple of weeks of quiet in October after we get married, and we're going to have a couple of weeks of no shows. So just be prepared for that, but know that I'm going to be very happy and we'll come back in full force. I want to thank Katherine, Jigar, and of course Mark Chambers. This was a really fantastic conversation. Thank you for coming. Always a pleasure to be here. And of course, a big thanks to the Urban Future Lab, Acre, Solar One, and NYSERDA for supporting the Clean Energy Connections event. We love it here, and we hope to come back here again. So you're out there, you're clearly listeners to the show, you're at networking events, pass around the show. You know, maybe you're like swapping podcast recommendations like baseball cards. Pull up the Energy Gang, say, oh man, I got a show for you. You should listen to this. I know that there are plenty of energy geeks in your life that would want to listen to it. And we've got another podcast called The Interchange that I do. It's more of an interview format with my co-host Shail Khan. You can subscribe to that as well. We got a lot of audio content there for you. And of course, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and anywhere else. Thanks again. Have a great night, everybody. We appreciate your time. With Jigar, Katherine, Mark, I'm Stephen Lacey, and this is The Energy Gang.